Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew Armstrong. This is my first video. I'm going to have several videos to come behind this video, but I actually want to make this really fast. So I've been studying. I've been studying the I guess coordination of Jesus in the Bible and him being referred to as the bright morning star. I've been studying that for probably about 10 years. The bright morning star is the planet Venus. So I've essentially been on a quest to discover why Jesus would be referred to as the planet Venus in throughout the Bible. And it's been this long, arduous journey. And over time, I've discovered all sorts of really fun stuff. And I think that now is the time for me to start really releasing this information to the general public. I do have a page on Facebook already called Pahana. It's the Venus volcanic event. I know obviously people aren't going to really, give two hoots about what it is I have to say. There's going to be lots of people a lot of haters out there that are going to, try to pick apart everything I say also. So, I'm fully aware of what to expect and I'm not really that worried about it. I just want to explain some things to you real quick first, though. A lot of people don't realize that the Old Testament and the Old Testament as we know it was first transcribed in about 400 BCE or so. Ptolemy the second was basically governed over all of like northern Egypt, the Levant, what is Palestine and Israel today, and to present day Syria. And the Israelites had recently come out of Babylon after being liberated by Cyrus the Great prior to Alexander and Ptolemy. That stuff happened, about 100 years or 200 years later or so. But they had recently returned to what is Israel today out of Babylon after being captured by Nebuchadnezzar. And what Nebuchadnezzar did was he didn't take everybody out of Israel. He only took very specific people out of Israel. He took the most intelligent and the most wealthy, and he brought them. He didn't actually subjugate these people. Actually, what he did was he had them work in his uh, private court. And what they did, we're not exactly sure, but we know that he utilized their intellectual, uh, you know, know-how for the benefit of the Babylonian kingdom. And knowing that Assyria and Babylon were, so keen on the skies and mathematics, we would assume that whatever it was that he had the, captured Israelites do had something to do with that, probably. So once they returned to Israel, after being liberated by Cyrus, they were allowed to they're allowed to practice their own religion and do whatever they wanted. Once Alexander conquered the area, or reconquered the area some 100 years later, he died, and Ptolemy of Philadelphus II he governed over all of that land. Now Ptolemy, that area would have been called like the Hellenistic world, and he actually had 72 Hebrew scribes transcribe into 70 individual books, or 72 individual books, the Torah into Greek. Okay, and that was called the Septuagint. It was the first transcribed version of the Torah as we know it. There were 72 original books, and they were transcribed into the Greek language. And Ptolemy had those 72 books circulated throughout the region and placed in the Alexandria Library. Now, a lot of people do not know this information, and it's very important information because what a lot of people don't realize is that when you look at who is considered Greek, 2,000 years ago, if I were walking around in Palestine 2,000 years ago, most people would have looked pretty much the same, whether you've gone to northern Egypt, Palestine, Sicily, Romania, any of those areas. Pretty much everybody looked Phoenician. It's because they pretty much all are or were. And so the regions themselves had different ways of practicing these religions that were probably ancient in that time already. In the Levant, there was multiple gods that were being practiced prior to Nebuchadnezzar having captured the region, and bringing the Israelites into Babylon. So really, you don't see a monotheistic tradition in Judaism until after they are released by Cyrus, at which point Ezra starts basically practicing what we now know as the books of Moses and things like that. Those things that we believe or are believed to have been uh, constructed while in captivity in Babylon around 400 BCE, 500 BCE, I believe. Um, Actually, I think it may have been like 600 BCE or so. Either way, so prior to all of that, what we consider mythology was more likely a study of the ancient people's own religion. And the way that they practiced it prior to having written history and uh, being able to record things on clay or whatever. The most efficient way would be to use the sky and the constellations of the sky. We know that they did this. You have constellations of Perseus, that tell the story of Perseus. You have constellations of Hercules. Essentially, you tell the story of Hercules because you have the other characters in the story. You have Hydra, and you have, you know, Leo, and you have all these other characters that would have that. Basically, you walk the constellation of Hercules through the sky, and he does battle with all these other constellations. Well, so the Greeks, and the Babylonians and the Syrians, they all did the same thing. You were able to locate their individual stories of mythology uh, that they related to using the constellations because at the end of the day, it's the greatest template of all until the end of time. Those stars will remain in place, and so will those stories. So, what I have come to realize over time is that the Israelites, took several things away, and including that uh, they also used the constellations to develop and translate their stories that we see in the Bible. So I'm going to go ahead and open my Bible and read from it what I have here. And now this is just the first of several that I will be coming up with over the next, however many videos it takes. But I'm basically going to present uh, multiple stories that can be told and delivered using the constellations that are written about in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In fact, the Stations of the Cross, the Exodus. But this is actually a very fascinating one. This is the first one that I came to realize, and later I will get into the Altar in the Sea, um, which is Pegasus and Pisces, and there's some very fascinating things that I've come to realize, including the including the idea that Noah's Ark as well as the tabernacle are both ancient constellations that I'm not going to reveal at this time, but I do have them and I will show them to you uh, in a later video. But right now, I just want to show you how fascinating this really is. So we start with Second Book of Kings, chapter 2, uh, verse 1 through 3. I'm going to start here. It starts with Hercules, and there's a reason for it because not only does Hercules now this actually I realized I can't even really remember how it was that I came to realize this. I think it had something to do with me investigating Orion as being Elijah because I noticed that he had his hand up and it looked like he was holding his mantle, and Elisha calling him his father at some point, and I realized that there was some historical information that would suggest Elijah were oh gosh, I can't even think of his name. Well, that Aquarius was Deucalon and Orion was Prometheus, and something along those lines. Anyway, I somehow concluded and realized that what I had figured out was pretty accurate. So either way, I started with Hercules being at the very beginning of this chapter, and it says, and this is very fascinating, actually, even the language, and I'm actually going to read from the New American Bible. It says, "When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, he and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal." So now I'm just going to tell you this is how I'm suggesting this. So this constellation is Hercules, and it represents Elijah and Elisha. Now the reason why, and they begin at Gilgal. This would be Gilgal, and I'm going to show you why this is Gilgal. So Gilgal actually translates into circle of stones, okay, in Koine Greek, which is also what the Septuagint was written into. The Septuagint was written into Koine Greek. Okay, so when you look at the constellation of Hercules, it actually looks like a circle of stones. Okay, and it also looks like a swastika, a reverse swastika. We see that the reverse swastika is something that the Hopi and some Native Americans use as a way to describe the how uh, God or Massaw had asked them to traverse the planet in the four separate directions, um, depending on the particular piece of corn that each color or each race had picked. So if you picked a white corn, you went in one direction, the yellow corn went in that direction, the red corn went in that direction, and the blue corn went in the other direction. Um, And so you see this, and when you even look at the Toponi tablet, you actually see the constellation Hercules at the top of the Toponi tablet. You see the constellation Pisces here, and you see the constellation of the Uranus. So you see three constellations on the Toponi tablet, but I'm not going to get into the Toponi tablet right now. I'm just talking about the circle of stones, and this is Gilgal. The it's also the constellation of Hercules. All right, so we're going to start with Gilgal. All right, so stay here, please, Elijah says to Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Bethel. Okay, Aphiacus will be Bethel. As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, Elisha replied, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel, where the guild prophets went out to Elisha and asked him, Do you know that the Lord will take your master from over you today? Yes, I know it, he replied. Keep still. Now, the fact that he says keep still is fascinating because it's a constellation, and we know that constellations cannot move. And so it's actually referencing the idea that they are specifically telling the story as if they were staring up at the sky, and a man is telling, let's say, I'm actually telling you, the scribe, this story, and I'm using what I'm looking at above me. And so I'm telling you This is how the story goes via the sky. Okay, so be still. Then Elijah says to him, "Stay here, please, Elisha, for the Lord has sent me onto Jericho. As the Lord lives and as you yourself live," Elisha replied, "I will not leave you." So they went on to Jericho, where the guild prophets approached Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord will take your master from over you today?" "Yes, I know it," he said. "Keep still." Now, Bethel means house of God. Okay, so Aphiacus is Bethel, house of God. Jericho means city of the moon. Okay, so you have circle of stones, um, house of God, and city of the moon. Okay, so then he says, then Elijah says to Elisha, "Please stay here, as the Lord has sent me on to the Jordan. As the Lord lives, and as yourself live," Elisha replied, "I will not leave you." And so the two went on together to the Jordan. 50 of the guild prophets followed, and when the two stopped at the Jordan, stood facing them at a distance, Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, and struck the water, which divided, and both crossed over it. So when you look at the sections of the heavens, you have Aquarius begins the area called the sea. And in the sea, you have the fish, Pisces, you have Cetus, and then you have the Eurydanus, which is a river. On the other side of the Eurydanus is the other shoreline, which has Orion standing with his hand raised in the air. So it says that Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water, which divided, and they both crossed on dry land. So it's telling you that this constellation here is Elijah holding his mantle above his head and striking the Eurydanus, in which they were able to cross from Jericho to the other side of the sea. When they had crossed over, or to the other side of the Jordan, I'm sorry, when they crossed over, Elijah says to Elisha, "Ask for whatever I may do for you, because I am taken away from you." Elisha answered, "May I receive double portion of your spirit." Now, right behind Orion, you see Gemini, which is two individuals. And it says, "He wants to receive a double portion of your spirit. You have asked something that is not easy," he replied. "Still, if you see me taken up from you, your wish will be granted, otherwise not." As they walked on conversing, a flaming chariot and flaming horses came between them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Now remember, this book was written in Greek, and you see a flaming chariot and a flaming horse come down from the sky, which is clearly Apollo. Now, the reason for this is because Apollo had Artemis kill Orion. Okay, that is the story. So they are verifying in this story that the constellation they are referencing to the reader is Orion, because Apollo is coming down and removing Elijah from earth and bringing him to heaven. He's bringing him into the sky to be among the constellations. So basically, what they're saying is that Orion is the constellation of Elijah. I'm sorry. When Elisha saw it happened, he cried out, my father, Israel's chariots and drivers." But when he could no longer see him, Elisha gripped his own garment and tore it in two. So we see another reference of a double with Gemini right behind us. Then he picked up Elijah's mantle, which had fallen from him, and he went back and he stood at the bank of the Jordan, which is the Eurydanus. And remember, the word Jordan actually means to flow down. So you see that the Eurydanus is flowing downwards. Okay, so it says, and he went back and stood at the bank of the Jordan, wielding the mantle which had fallen from Elijah. He struck the water in his turn and said, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" Which Elisha struck the water. When Elisha struck the water, it divided, and he crossed over. So again, you see now Elisha is Orion, and he's striking the Eurydanus so that he can cross back over across the sea, which is now dry land, and go back to Jericho. So the guild prophets in Jericho, who were on the other side, saw him and said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." They went to meet him, bowing to the ground before him. "Among you Among your servants are 50 brave men, they said, and they went off to find Elijah, and Elisha has trying to explain to them that no, he went into heaven. When they returned to Elisha in Jericho, where he was staying, he said to them, Did I not tell you not to go? Once the inhabitants of the city complained to Elisha, the site of the city was fine indeed, as my lord can see, but the water is bad and the land is unfruitful. So Elisha says to them, Bring me a new bowl. Now look at the constellation of Aquarius. Now imagine what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying while I'm describing this excerpt to you. Bring me a new bowl, Elisha says, and put salt into it. When they had brought it to him, he went out to the spring and threw salt into it, saying, Thus says the Lord, I have purified this water. Never again shall death or marriage spring from it. And the water has stayed pure even to this day, just as Elisha prophesied. So you see that we are in the sea, Pisces, a whale, Cetus. This is clearly salt water, and he is at a freshwater spring. And we know that salt does not purify a freshwater spring. And so they're not talking about magic. They're talking about the constellation of Aquarius, where he has taken a bowl, mixed salt into it, and is dumping it back into the salt water. So they were telling us, like a milestone, these little things. This is Jericho. Aquarius is Jericho. And the reason why that this is beneficial is because when you read other stories pertaining to Jericho, now you know that Jericho is located in Aquarius, and thus you can fulfill the story using the constellations. Okay. So then it says, uh, from there, Elisha went up to Bethel. So he goes back to Bethel, that is Ophiuchus. Okay, while he was on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him. Go up, bald head, they shouted. Go up, bald head. Now, fascinatingly, Ophiuchus is actually represented as a bald headed person. So let me see if I can find a picture of him real quick. Ophiuchus. Okay, let's look at an image of Ophiuchus. So Ophiuchus is represented as a bald-headed or elderly snake wrestler. Okay, which is also indicative of Hercules, because we know that Hercules also was wrestling and killing snakes from a young age. So Ophiuchus is actually not Ophiuchus at all. Ophiuchus is Heracles or Hercules, and he represents different individuals depending on what religion you are and what story you're telling. Okay, so Ophiuchus in this story is Elisha. So they say, Go up, bald head, go up, bald head. The prophet turned and saw them, and he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Okay, and so then he takes, so then two she bears is what the story says, two she bears. Now, here's the thing: is Ursa Major and Ursa Minor are the she bears, and their commander is Boots. Boots is the protector of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the two she bears. So Boots. So now Elisha comes from being a bald-headed Ophiuchus to becoming Boots, and he commands Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the two she bears, to come out of the woods and tear apart 42 of the children. And from there he goes up to Mount Carmel, and thence he returns to Samaria. And that is indicative of where this story was created. The story was created in Samaria. And so now we know what the story of Elijah and Elisha is truly about. Now, we may not know exactly what it's about, but we know that it has something to do, or was being told using a series of constellations as the sky changed over the seasons. And this probably also has to do with certain planetary movements. They may have actually been describing a planet that was moving from different houses throughout the year in some sort of orbital movement. It could have been uh, it could have been Mercury going to and from, maybe some type of retrograde. It could have been Saturn. It could have been Venus. Um, but either way, the Book of Kings, and actually multiple books, and this is just the first of many I'm going to read and do for you, is actually a series of stories that was once told through constellations. Now, whether or not these stories are true, I mean, I don't know. Did Alicia really have two female bears come out of the woods and kill 42 children, and we still talk about him to this day? That's hard for me to. I can't say either way because I'm not going to be that guy. But we know for sure that it was a myth. So thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to make several, and I hope I blow your minds. So have a good day. Thanks.